Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk About Autism in Hmonglish podcast. On today's episode, I this whole entire next season is just going to be a series of amazing Hmong brothers and sisters who kind of reached out to me when I started putting podcast episodes out. And whether it's something that resonated with them, or they just wanted to share their story, or they were ready to share their story and wanted to have a safe place to do it, I just had so many amazing people reach out. And this episode, I'm really excited for. You guys probably can recall my guest on last season, Hluas. She's one of our family friends, and I think this just speaks to the power of social media and of just talking about autism. And after she came on my show, her sister contacted me, and so I was just talking to her about how you and I met, and just how we just always felt like we've known each other. And now, as I'm looking at her, my guest today, I'm like, you know what, we're among sisters, So I'm really excited for our chat here. Mai Nhia, welcome to the podcast.
So much for having me. I'm very excited.
Yeah, so Mai Nhia Freeze, I'm so excited to kind of dive into the topics that we had talked about. But first of all, I just want to commend you for just being really, like, just brave and willing to talk about this. I think that's the biggest thing when I created the podcast was, like, I was really worried and nervous, like, "Oh my gosh, there's going to be nobody who wants to talk to me," right? Or no one who is ready to share their story. And in the beginning, it was me, like, seeking out parents, right? That was part of my, parent group, and I was just, looking at different individuals who are ready, right? That's the biggest component of this is when they were ready to share their story. But I kept hoping in my first season, I was like, I don't know how many seasons I'm going to do this or how long this will last, but I hope that before I, put it up back on the shelf, I hope that I will at least get one adult, Hmong adult with autism who will share their experiences, right? Because I think it's a little unethical to ask any child to be on the show, obviously. But
Right.
I wanted to hear the perspective from a Hmong individual, an adult Hmong individual who has, experienced just the various aspects of, the autism spectrum. Um, Diagnosis. And so last season, though, on season two, I had one individual on the show, and I was very, very glad that there are individuals out there who want to share their story. And then I'm just so glad that this guy kind of got onto your radar, and that you are on my season three. And I know that it's a little interesting to just point out that last season it was a gentleman, right, a Hmong brother. This season is you, and so I'm curious to know how did you hear about the podcast, and what made you go, you know what, I think I'm ready to share.
Well, actually, I first learned about your podcast from when my sister Yua was on it,
Hmm.
talking about her daughter, and I was really intrigued, so I started listening to all the other ones, and I was just like, it's so nice that there's a Hmong advocate and representative for uh, people in the community that have autism, and like just parents recognizing that their children have it now, because when we were little, everything would just be, oh, like sa, or
Hmm.
you know or like that we were all just naughty, and it wasn't because of a mental health, just divergency.
Yeah, definitely. So, you share that you're, and I won't give your age away, but you're in your mid 30s. And so, you share that you got your diagnosis, as an adult, but even like call a description, cái hay là, bên này thế gì, như là chỉ bảo cho autism, and then that generation là chỉ bảo cho thêm lời thì, như là cái hay là thì, ôi, cái mình nó rất rất boy à, they're naughty, là chỉ mong lừa, là chỉ bảo ra chỉ li, là chỉ gashly. Um, and so for yourself, before your autism diagnosis, and if you don't mind to tell me, how recent was that?
It actually was just this earlier this year.
Okay.
Um, so I found out that I was diagnosed with ADHD in like 2015, and just because I just had so many mental health issues where nothing seemed to be working, and
Mhm.
I actually had to go through like multiple tests, and it was surprisingly vigorous because
Yeah,
a lot of people who have it, who are diagnosed, generally get it as children. So
right,
and the healthcare professions are actually doing better about it because they're recognizing that we have a whole community of Hmong people who aren't, um, I guess, as educated.
right.
So I actually had to like seek out doctors who were more willing and understanding of that to help me
Mhm.
figure out what was going on with my brain.
Yeah. So you were diagnosed with ADHD, you said 2019?
15.
15, so
Y-
almost 10 years ago, right? And
Yes.
then this year, ganyan got diagnosed with autism. So before that, what did you know about autism in general?
Um, Honestly, I didn't know very much. I only knew the stereotypes
Mhm.
of, where everyone's like, oh, it's these very specific things, like these very specific characteristics. But everyone would say, oh, but it's a spectrum. So just like
Right.
very vague idea of what autism was.
Right, and I think, as I'm hearing from parents and other home professionals and just anyone, it's like it's hard to explain in Hmong call. We don't have a word for it. So when we say
Yeah.
autism, they're just, they equate it to, overgeneralizing it to just one word. And it's just like, it's so different. But at the same time, that's also why it's so hard to explain because it is a spectrum, right? And
Yeah.
there are so many different variations of what autism could look like. So, can you tell me um, what life events led you to seek that autism diagnosis after the ADHD diagnosis?
Well, so I had very just intrusive thoughts and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of like suicidal ideation, and they would just pop up once in a while, and I was just like, oh, this is just a normal part of adulthood because life is hard and we're always stressed out. And um so I just chalked it down to that. But like as the years passed, it kept getting worse and worse, and I'd have good days and bad days, but it got to the point where it was so consistent that I couldn't process anything, and I couldn't regulate. And eventually I burned out, and um I actually started seeing a therapist because I reached a point where like the only solution to me was if I took my own life,
Mm-hmm.
because that's going to be the only time that I get to rest, where I'm just like I don't know why I was so exhausted all the time and just tired, even though I was sleeping and I was doing everything I was supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
And then my therapist actually mentioned, she's just like, oh, do you think maybe you had burnout? And I remember just thinking like, oh, well, like everybody goes through burnout. But um after going to more sessions, I found out that there was something called autism burnout,
Mm-hmm.
and it's from just a person with autism who's trying to mask and constantly be normal in society. And I guess I just did that for so long that eventually, like, my brain just started to like deteriorate and shut down from that, because it was a constant, like, I I don't know how to explain it, but it's like your brain is on this like autopilot, but like while it's autopiloting, it's also in like a fight or flight mode because
Yes.
it doesn't feel safe, because it's like, oh, you have
Mm-hmm.
to pretend to be something else constantly.
Mm-hmm. This is this part's gonna be unscripted. I'm just curious now that you're sharing that. Do you think, and like from a Hmong sister to another, right? Do you feel like the way that we were raised, the way the culture is shaped to where um, you know, again, I try very hard to be transparent on my show because I think it's
Yeah.
important to just talk about, our experiences. And
Oh, absolutely.
do you think that the way that we were raised as Hmong daughters, the intensity, the responsibility that's put on us very young, all of that, do you feel like that contributed to some of that, the masking? And then, because, like the burnout was kind of like a byproduct of all the years of masking.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I feel like honestly, being among women specifically, has taught me how to mask, and I, I mask very well. So, when I tell people like, oh, I am autistic, and everyone's like, oh, but you don't seem autistic,
Mhm.
and I was just like, well, that's because I know how to mask in like such a large view because growing my mom would always tell me like, oh, one day like you're gonna be a nya and like you have to play the role and you have to do this and
Mhm.
you have to do all these very specific things, and I remember always telling her, but that's not who I am, and she's like, oh, but that's
Right?
who you're going to be
Mhm.
when Nepal and Zia are visiting. Like you have to do that, you have to be this very specific kind of person.
Mhm. I mean, as we go into the workplaces, right? And as we become grown and we have our own families and, we separate ourselves from, the childhood home, right?
Mm,
I think that we learn to kind of have to even or maybe even not after you leave the home, even when you're in school. I was just reading something recently about how like who we are at home as Hmong children, Hmong sons and daughters, when we go
mhm.
to school, we code switch, right? We become this like,
Yeah.
very like vibrant and, very bold and very, we have leadership skills and,
Yeah.
some might even
Yeah.
call it bossy. But shit, we're different, right? And then you
Yeah.
do that for so many years and then you become an adult. You become a professional in whatever your chosen field. But as soon as you by the Hmong function, for some reason our brains code switch and you're like, oh,
Yeah.
like how can I you just take on this persona that you're like, where did this come from? Why am I all of a sudden so submissive when
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
like, the holy I'm in charge,
Yeah.
And so it's very different for that type of, just back and forth, trying to catch up. And so,
Mhm.
I that you put that so eloquently about having to learn to how to mask at such a young age because it's so ingrained, y'all. And
Yeah.
then, it's just like, it's just so normal and so natural as you share that. I was like, girl, I had the same things growing up too,
Yeah.
like I would hear, "이번 onyama yochi shouldn't oma." I'm like, dude, I don't even make rice for my family. My husband does. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
all these
Yeah.
things that our parents, our mothers told us that we were expected to be and to do when we were older. Like I'm just so
Yeah.
happy to see that, we're able to go, you know what, that doesn't really fit our lifestyle. And so it's hard, right? Yes, go ahead.
Oh, it's okay. I was gonna say it was actually my husband who, because I didn't notice that I did that until, my
Okay.
husband will come to like functions and we'll be at my parents' house, and then suddenly, I code switch and
Mhm.
he'd be like, where he's like, who is this like docile, like obedient person? He's like, who are you? Because
Oh
he's
my
just like, you're always so
goodness.
outspoken and loud. And I was like, oh, I was
Right.
like, well, my mom has always told me I was outspoken and loud, but like
Mhm.
I was never like myself to my like highest potential at home because,
Mhm.
it was always loud, and, I was practicing, being a good daughter and like
Yeah.
preparing myself to be a nya someday.
Yes. So, Manya, I said your name at the beginning of the podcast. It's free. So, kayo ito tinang mikado, right? And
Yes.
so, I wanted to ask you, and we talked about this, and thank you for agreeing to answering this next question. And so, that was a great segue for me. Um, do you feel like being married to a white man versus a Hmong man has helped you on your journey to discover, all your mental health needs and being willing and able to address it and to tackle it head on and be open to embracing what that even means to have ADHD, what it means to seek an autism diagnosis? Do you feel like it made it easier for you?
Yes, absolutely. Because he didn't grow up with like you said, we were ingrained with these values. He didn't grow up being taught like "Jining yo yo, jining ho JK," like they're the masculine ones, the strong ones, the
Mm-hmm.
providers, and they don't show emotions, and like they don't cry over things. Where he's very open to mental health, and he was just like, well, it's really good to cry, and it's good for you to express these things whether you're a man or a woman. And just like he doesn't have the same expectations of him. as he would if, he came from a Hmong family.
Right. I mean, I would, say that more nowadays there are probably, more Hmong men who are also more open and willing to, encourage their partners to, um, address their mental health needs too, right? But
Yeah.
I think it's very interesting that for you, it made it that much easier that you didn't have to kind of fight that battle, right? Where you're like, I feel
Yeah.
like there's something going on, and to have that support, right? Because sometimes that's all it takes, and I think in a partnership, sometimes we know that we can't fight our partner's battles, but man, just being there as their cheerleader and supporting and encouraging them can really make a big difference.
Yeah. Well, and I know that, like, he doesn't have the "nya" expectations of me either,
Mhm.
so, like, that was just, like, a whole weight off of my shoulders where I was just like, "Oh, I don't have to, play the role of the perfect nya." How they always say "nya
Mhm.
10,000" or "nya McDonald's."
Excuse me, I'm Yakovers. Um, and so, you did mention something too that your husband, he was raised by parents who were also open and willing to support him right through any of those mental health needs. And so I think that is a big factor too, in that, um, for the parents to be aware and to kind of pass that openness and that awareness down to their child so that they can also, those conversation and just really what my entire podcast is about is just normalizing those conversations, right? Like for him growing up, it was just normal to talk about your mental health, right? To talk
Yes,
about
yeah,
your
it was very.
diagnosis, like, hey, I have ADHD, but here's what I do, to kind of help me regulate or help me figure out, just coping strategies because I'm dealing with all this. How was it for you growing up in your family? Um, was there, I mean, typical Hmong daughters, right? When
Yeah.
you were talking about how like you were just you yourself were very, outspoken, all those things. But again, I feel like, and I use this phrase. I want to make sure I put it across very lightly, it kind of gets beaten out of us, right? Like our
Yeah.
parents don't want us to
Yeah.
be outspoken. They don't want us to have a voice. They don't want us to have opinions. They want us to conform. They want us to be obedient, yakahaina, to be
Yeah.
very, yes, whatever you say, you're right.
Yes.
I'm wrong. You're right.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think
and
that's just the Asian culture too. So,
mm-hmm,
because actually in Japan, there's a prophecy that says, the tallest nail gets hammered down, which
mm-hmm,
means if you stand out, then society's gonna beat you even harder because
mm-hmm.
you're up taller than everybody else. So, I think that's
Y-
just us a whole as a Asian community.
Yes, I see a lot of parallels between the Hmong culture and like Japanese or South Korean or Chinese. So I see a lot of
Yeah.
parallel there. So growing up, then, what are some? And you said you got your ADHD diagnosis about 10 years ago. Was it before you got married?
It was right around the time that I got married because,
Okay.
I think that's when, like, my symptoms peaked,
Mm-hmm.
is I like to phrase it, where my husband started noticing, like, very specific things where he was just like, "I think you might have ADHD," because, like, I
Mm-hmm.
just couldn't focus, and I was just like, "Oh, I just have a lot going on," and he's like,
Yeah.
"No, he's like, "There's another layer to it." So, even him having it and then recognizing symptoms, really helped me because he saw just how much I was struggling.
Mm-hmm. And do you mind to share with me, like, what was the reception from your family when you share them with your siblings or with your parents?
Well, all my siblings they're all very open-minded
Mm-hmm.
and, understanding. Um, it it's kind of funny with my parents because, like, they have always said that I was a little bit different, but, they couldn't always pinpoint what it was because, even from, like, a young age, my mom, she really wanted me to be, like, the good yeah, so I remember her telling me constantly, "I'm training you for this, so you need to
Yeah.
learn this," and then, I would always just kinda, like, fight against it because 'cause I'd be like, "But why do I need to do that? Why can't I find a partner instead of a husband?" She's like, "Well, because that's not the way it is," and I would always be like, "But I need very specific answers," because I was also very literal,
Mm-hmm.
and, when I told them I was 80 when I got diagnosed with ADHD, my mom was just, she was just like, "Oh, well, you what did she say? She said something. She said, "Oh, 個英語是寫了呀." Because I was always very spacey and I would forget.
Uh-huh.
So she was just like, "Oh, okay, so there's an explanation and a term for it."
Yeah. Um, for our non-Hmong listeners, Sisilu, if we were to define that, right? Sisilu literally means like missing your brain. Sincerely, really. But if we were to, define it in a kinder way, and what they're really trying to say is like forgetful, right? So she
Yeah.
was saying that you were kind of always forgetful growing up. Manya, just chatting with you, sparking so many questions. I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to ask all these things. It's
Oh,
okay.
absolutely. I'm open to it. I love it.
Yes. So when you were younger, now that you're in your mid 30s, and you think about when you were younger in grade school, are there things that you felt or did back then that you're like, "Oh my gosh, that was autism. That was, autism characteristics," or that because like you said, you were very literal, right? Like,
Yeah.
and they're like, "Oh, man, yeah, no, no, it's raining cats and dogs outside." You'd be like, "Oh, what? Cats and
Yeah.
dogs," or stuff like
Yeah.
that, right?
Yeah. So I really struggled with like satires and metaphors,
Mhm,
and
idioms.
yeah, it like I just didn't understand any of them, and like I would know what they meant after somebody would like explain it to me.
Mm,
But I just remember a lot of like pretending because I wasn't like the other kids. Because I remember them being like, "Oh, well, I have imaginary friends," and like all the kids, like all of my classmates had
yeah,
imaginary friends, and I was just like,
yeah.
"Oh," and I was like, "That's so weird." I was like, "Well, I don't have imaginary friends because I have real life friends," and they're like, "Well,
Yeah.
what about when you're at home?" Or I was like, "Well, I have a lot of siblings, so there's always somebody there, so I don't need any
Imaginary
imaginary
friends.
friends." Yeah, because just like the abstract thinking was just not exist like it was just non-existent for me.
Yeah. Tell me about, socialization, social skills, things like that. Was there anything growing up and you always felt like, "Why are my friends, like, grasping onto this, but it's so foreign, the idea of it," like or even, like, social cues or body language. Was that a struggle for you growing up?
Well, it like I would say yes and no.
Mhm.
So like like I said, being raised Hmong,
Yeah.
my mom did a very good job of teaching me to pick up on those cues
Yeah.
and just to pick up just like emotions, and she'd be like, "Oh, if somebody's saying this is what they really mean."
Mhm.
So I had a lot of practice at it,
Yeah.
and and I would be like, "Okay, so I'm at school, so this is the person I have to be," and then like I'm at home and this is the person I can be, and then when we're
Mhm.
in public, this is who I have to be. So I um like a benefit from the autism is like observation and pattern recognition.
Mhm.
So I would use the pattern recognition of like, oh, if this person's doing the same thing as the person from the other situation, this is how I'm supposed to
Yeah.
react to it. So this is how I would process everything. This is how I just, went through my life, was just being like, oh, okay, like, which personality do I need to be and how do I need to act?
Right. Gosh, I can see how there's that burnout, y'all. To
Yeah.
constantly being like checking that chapter out and be like, okay, this is who I need to be in this situation.
Yeah.
But we talk about how, of course, I'm not dogging our mother's generation's parenting
No, yeah.
style, right? I mean, I myself have had struggles with coming to terms with just, is a big term, that generational trauma and everything.
Yeah.
But I mean, gosh, if that's such a great example of that silver lining
Yeah.
of their parenting style because it really helped you, to set those expectations and be so clear and so to be so repetitious too, like over and over and over, y'all. Since
Yeah.
like probably for us since the age of like starting to become Yolango until like
Yeah.
teenagers, even now, is always telling us how to be, what to say, how to do this for this person. So
Yeah.
I mean, even for me, I'm having like light bulbs are going off because I'm going, I wonder if that's why for a lot of our Hmong adults that it isn't as prevalent because of those little tweaks in how we're being raised that, it is
Yeah.
not as hard to pick up on them because, our parents are so judicious in making sure that we know because they have that expectation, y'all.
Yeah. So
So,
and and the thing is, like, I mean, I don't, want to just like say that my mom was doing all this out of, just culture and stuff, but like it was also like very good intentions.
Mhm, for
But
sure.
and she is more traditional thinking, but like I've noticed I I tried to explain to her that I do have autism, and she was
Mhm.
willing to listen, and I think
Yeah.
that's a big um that's a big thing, like that's a big hurdle because there's the language barrier because there's such a lack of terms and words, but I think just like explaining it to her made her more comfortable because I think their biggest fear is that like they spoke one thing, so
Mhm.
that's why they were so just like determined to have us be a certain way.
Yes, and, last season, I had the amazing Dr. Alyssa Vang on, and she shared an anecdotal, idea, and it never occurred to me, right, that possibly for big Hmong culture, why maybe autism has been overlooked or, underdiagnosed is the culture itself kinda, like, insulates and kinda, can, um overly mask those symptoms, right? Those
Oh, yes,
characteristics,
yes.
because she shared about how, and I'm going to repeat this, and I encourage you to go listen to the episode with Dr. Alyssa. It's season 2, episode 1. Um, Putouna, and I don't think it's happening anymore, but tsaug right? I don't know, like what leads a family or a man to make that decision. Sometimes it might be to call you or you bought or you by your whatever the reason, but Dr. Lissa brought up a really great point that sometimes you tutu Hmong na, you tu ya. And yeah, I know I say this and our feelings aren't hurt because we know that our parents like love and like, more like you tu on a pedestal and us girls are like, wow, we are like we are equally,
Yeah.
as global. That's a different podcast. Um, but we know that lalo gitu, so they would do anything for their blue, right? Even if
Mhm.
it means "Uja gusto to no ni hachipo na lute chita ni chipo talangali ni te
Yeah.
chinjalangali te chipi sak ni monang," right? So pe pa ji to pa ni oh to tun sai to jang ni pi pe to pe mu ji ni lo pe tu nya. And then, like Dr. Lissa said, now, with the two age, no social skills, no communication skills,
Yeah.
hardly talks, can't even look other people in the eye. All of a sudden, he has a wife. And then, good more, right? And so then we go, but, if we look at the numbers, oh, autism never existed in the Hmong community. I disagree. I think that, there's a lot of talk like, why are the numbers so high now? What's going on? And it's like, it's not that
Yeah.
autism is all of a sudden starting, now that both they can make out, oh my gosh, autism, all these other diagnoses. I think that it's always been there, but, as a Hmong culture as a whole, we were able to mask it on such a level that we didn't even realize that's what we were doing, y'all. And so,
Right.
I mean, of course, I have no proof of this happening. I'm just thinking, ideology wise, it makes
Right.
a lot of sense, and so, I know we didn't, I'm not really sure if that was even on our topic list today, but I think it's really important to point out that no matter what generation of Hmong you are, the way that we were parented can either, like I said, could be silver linings, and you're like, I'm so glad that your mom set you up for success. Really, maybe
Yeah.
you felt like she was setting you up for failure because in the end, good that you mong right? So it's quite kind
Yeah.
of like, mom, I didn't need to do all these things.
Yeah.
Because my husband doesn't have these expectations, but hey,
Yeah.
unbeknownst to yourself, right? Like, it actually really helped you to navigate those social situations. So, before we move on, any other situations where you look back as a child or as a teen and you're like, man, if I had known, or if teachers had seen these patterns of behavior, or if anyone in my family had seen them, then it would have been like, kind of a precursor for me to go, oh, that's what that is, and gotten support early, anything like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Like, and I'm just coming to terms with that now where, for a long time I was very resentful because I remember, having to go to the parent teacher conference and then also like having to translate.
Yep.
Teachers would always tell my parents, "Oh, she's very smart, but she's lazy and she's not focused." And
Hmm.
and they thought it was just because, like, because I was a kid and I wasn't interested, but
Yeah.
I was always very interested in learning, but I
Mhm.
couldn't learn the way that I was being taught.
Yeah.
So my parents were also confused, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, cái chuyện này của bé tại con chính chế ta kể ta chỉ có ô không muốn chỉ tao li có ô không muốn chỉ ta
Mhm.
li," and I was just like, "I don't know, like I don't know how to explain it to you because I'm also a child."
Right. Yeah, gosh, that's another, as we look back, as we Minyo, right, or the next generation, and we tell our Minyo that we were child translators for our parents, like they would not
Yeah,
believe it, y'all.
yeah,
So I this is just a southern gal from me saying, "Bless your heart," for having to navigate through all that. That must have been so hard, y'all. But like I can't believe teachers were saying that to you. That's really harsh. Like they should
yeah.
have like asked for like another adult interpreter or translator come in
Yeah.
there.
Well, and you have to remember the times too, because this is back in the 90s before they had access to all of that, and
Sure.
so and then the children were the only ones that knew both like fluently.
Right. Um, and here's another thing that I've picked up too, just being in this field and working with Hispanic families too, is that the culturally, being a very obedient and very polite, very,
Mhm,
we don't want to cause any distress for anyone. So even when we go into meetings,
mhm.
yes, okay, sure, yes, because we don't want to upset anybody. We're very, like you said, very docile, very, agreeable. And so for me now, as a Hmong woman, as a person of color, whenever I have Hispanic families come in, I like break it down for them so to the point that I'm like, I want to make sure when you leave today that you understand what I'm telling you, or I
Yeah.
simplify in a way that it makes sense for them, and it has changed the way that I do my parent meetings. I don't just accept them saying, okay, yes, like I'm like, okay, but hey, I'm gonna break it down for you, make sure,
Yeah.
and then here's a visual, and here, I'll send them stuff. And so I think that's the difference too. But I think it just takes time, and I find it so courageous that you went through all of that and then went through your own personal trials and tribulations to arrive to where you're at today. I'm sure that so over the last 10 years, a diagnosis of ADHD along with ASD with autism is not uncommon, right? Even for even
Yeah.
right now, like 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, to have a dual diagnosis of ADHD and ASD is not uncommon. So, like, what are some strategies that you have used to manage and overcome barriers related to your diagnosis over the last decade?
Well, like the the biggest one, and I know this is the one that people have the most trouble with, is like
Mhm.
being open about it and accepting it, and then
Yeah.
asking for help.
Mhm.
So, like with my husband, I will tell him like, "Oh, like my ADHD is out of control and I can't do this thing," or like my autism is stopping me from doing these things, and like because he's very understanding, he
Mhm.
will help me out, but I know a lot of people are afraid to say like, "Oh, I have autism or I have ADHD," because a lot of it, boils down to people being like, "Oh, well, you can't keep using that as an excuse." Where I don't think people who don't have it don't understand the level of dysregulation that happens.
Mhm.
So, when I'm like if I'm doing a project, I won't stop because my autism brain is like, "No, you can't stop it until it is completed." But, my husband will understand and he'll come in and he'll be like, "Okay, well, like in 5 minutes, like we're going to take a break and you need to, go do this for self-care or do
Yeah.
that thing." And I think a lot of it is just having having resources.
Absolutely. In the form of, loving partners, loving family members, right? And friends who
Yeah.
understand, and you not having to explain yourself. That's so nice. I think about
Yeah.
for myself and my partner, I would say I have probably undiagnosed OCD. Very like, but I think that just comes from being a Hmong daughter, right? Or
Yeah.
a woman.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, when I am very compulsive with, like, cleaning, I'm just, like,
Mhm.
kind of manic about it, and it takes my hus and it took very a lot many, many years for me to receive the message, that it was coming nicely and with love, and he's like, "You've gotta stop, like, I think you're driving you're scaring the kids," 'cause,
Yeah.
I'm like
Yeah.
rage cleaning, I'm like, "Blah, blah, blah," and everything, but
Mhm.
it takes being able to hear it from someone who, can say, "You know what? I I see you, I literally see you, and you've got
Yeah.
to stop. I love you. You gotta. And so that's a great strategy where he doesn't just tell you that, he gives you like very specific thing to do, like go take 5 minute break, right, or whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
So that's really nice. Any other strategies that you guys use, or that you use, or even when you're in the workplace, or even with friends, where you're like, when you're sharing about your diagnosis, or if you were to, and things that you employ there.
Yeah, so I do a lot of what's called DBT and CBT, which is like cognitive behavioral
Mm-hmm.
therapy, and it's a lot of like talking to yourself. So like, you have all of these like scrambled thoughts, and what really helps me is like when I hear like my own thoughts that I think, okay, so if this was like another person, what would I be saying to them? Like
Mm-hmm.
if I was helping somebody else, what would I tell them who's in the same situation? Like, if I see
Yeah.
my friend just, doing the same like project and they're just stuck on it and you can see that they're fixated, like I would be concerned, be like, "Hey, I think maybe you should go get a drink of water." So I also like have to do it for
Mm-hmm.
myself to be like, "Okay, so like this is what I would tell them, so this is what I should be doing myself."
Yeah, for sure. No, I love that. So again, I really feel like I love, of course, if any listener reaching out to me and want to share their story. Um and I think that that is a missing piece of this big picture that I'm trying to paint. It's because we talk so much about Yao, right? Because that early intervention piece is so important. And a lot of my podcast is kind of focused on that, just because that's the general audience that I'm seeing. But I love that, you're sharing your story. What would you like to share with other Hmong adults who may also be struggling with seeking, whether it's an ADHD or an ASD diagnosis? Because, let's be honest, despite the fact that you are married to Mr. Freeze, and you got to experience what it's like to have a very supportive, encouraging partner who, because of his own journey, um, got to, experience that open mindedness to mental health. Regardless of that, what would you say are some of the things that you would share with other Hmong adults who are kind of, on the fence about, is this just because this is who I am? This is the Hmong me. This is how I was raised. So that is quote unquote normal. Or, when do you recognize, like, this isn't, like, I think I need help, but I don't know where to start. Like, can you share with what you would, share with a fellow Hmong brother or sister who is well into their adult years and going, this is, like he's talking about the autism burnout, which is such a great term to kind of like really look into, because I
Mm.
think we all experience some kind of burnout, right? But
Yeah.
then, like, how do you make the distinction between, is this like a burnout or an autism burnout? And then, like, you like kind of like unraveling, going, wait, that's what I was going through. I thought this was
Yeah.
normal burnout, right? Where it's just I'm
Yeah.
overwhelmed, because I mean that's a lot of us. But yeah, share about that journey to share, well, how you would share that with others.
Yeah, I would say the first thing is that if you're consistently unhappy, that's not normal. It is absolutely just not normal. Like no matter how much like social media or like any other adult is telling you like, oh, that's just adult. It's not normal to just consistently be unhappy, and like you can feel like small spurts of joy, but like generally overall, you should be comfortable where you are. You should be happy, and therapy, like talk therapy, I am a huge advocate for it, and I think everybody should do it. And it's not just, if you get to these low points, because just, going to therapy is what helped me figure out it led me to finding out that I was autistic, and it is also
Hmm.
very validating because then you have a starting point on how to heal. And like when I tell people like I feel normal now knowing, it doesn't make sense, but once you start that journey, you'll understand what normal is supposed to feel like compared to, just having to go through the motions day in and day out.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for sharing that, Mai Nhia. Um, as I push this podcast episode out there, gosh, I really hope that other Hmong adult individuals who may have experienced this, or kind of dealing with the same thing, if it's a aha moment for you, I think that would I would feel like this episode served its purpose, right? It's just all about awareness and all about sharing your journeys and everything. Now, I know so my the Facebook group that I co-founded about 2 years ago, we're only 2 years young, really. And then the podcast, it's wait, is it 2 years? No, we're three 3 years. We're 3 years young. We're still toddler age. Um, and then, of course, my podcast and my all the autism awareness that I'm trying. Oh, your cat's so
Yep.
cute.
She's very needy.
Oh, she's like, I need you to give me attention. um, Tell me, okay, this is the last question. I know this went beyond the few questions I sent you because I'm so excited to hear all the things and all the things
Oh,
you have
no,
to
I love
share.
it, like, I'm here
Yay.
for it.
Would you, in the Hmong community, right? And of course, not to say that, any kind of support group is not, helpful. They all are really. But
Yes.
what would you say? Are there any like Hmong adult autism groups out there or any kind of support for the Hmong adult with autism? Like, what would you like to see in the future? Or something to be created to kind of provide support? Because this is something I say all the time to my real life clients is that no, no, I get the new autism. But the thing is that they will always have autism, right? They will grow, they'll become teenagers and then
Yeah.
adults, and then so we're gonna need support along the way. But like, yeah, what would you like to see for Hmong adults with autism?
I think I would just like to see more acceptance.
Okay.
And like I think a community would be really good too. So, you can meet other like-minded people. Because I actually growing up, I had a lot of just um what's the word? I say my ADHD brain sometimes kicking harder than my
That's all right.
autism brain.
Yeah.
Just like I was just confused on who I was, and I never felt like I belonged.
Mhm.
Oh, identity crisis. So
Yes.
growing up, I just constantly had identity crisis, and I thought it was from being Hmong and American.
Mhm.
But after being more self-aware and like understanding myself, it was more of the autism. So I think just if you can meet other Hmong people to be like, if you're feeling this way, because I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels
Yeah.
like I'm having a constant crisis of who I am and like
Mhm.
how I should be.
Mhm. No, I love that answer. And we talked about the spectrum too of autism, right? And so,
Yeah.
do you find that when you talk to Hmong people, because I think maybe mainstream, makeup counterparts, they kind of get it, right? That
Yeah.
old term, the high functioning autism, they get it. So they're like, oh yeah, Mai Nhia, oh you have autism. But they understand already. Oh, she's talking with us, she's chatting back and forth, we're having full blown conversations. But
Yeah.
there might just be little few things here and there. But when you talk to Hmong people and you tell them that you have autism, and all they've ever known is the stereotypical young with autism, but they're like, oh, but kaya ito, you know, uh, I'm blanking out. Like, I don't want to age you, but like, got you
Y-
langado, right? But you're a
yeah.
woman. Kaya ito pa niya, ito Hmong pa niya. Then one nang like, let's see, with autism, and they might be a little unsure. Like, are you sure? Like, we just had this picture of what autism is, and they meet you, and they're like, oh man, okay. So, what is the response
Mhm.
there?
Usually, then I elaborate where I'm just like, oh, it's a spectrum because
Hmm.
everybody's brain is very different, and
Yes.
you'd be surprised where I do get that a lot from my MIGA peers too, where they're just
Okay.
like, oh, well, you don't seem like you have autism, and I was just like,
Oh, they say
oh,
that to you, like straight to your face,
yeah,
like,
yeah, I've had a couple where just, and then they're just like, well, doesn't everybody have autism? And I was like, well, that's why it's a spectrum
yeah.
because some people are further on it, and
Hmm.
for my Hmong peers, like the ones that I, have talked to, like they've all been very understanding of
Yeah.
it, where they're just like, oh, okay, like things make sense. And then I've had a lot of them question like, oh, wait, like, am I autistic then? Because
Yes.
I was just like, I was like, the probabilities are pretty high. And, like,
Yeah.
and especially like I have these conversations with my siblings because they do have, a little kiddos,
Hmm.
I tell them, I was just like, it's like it could be genetic. And I was like, if we come from the same genetics, so like I've been diagnosed, and I was like, there's a bunch of us, so like I can't be the only one out of the whole group of us that have it. And
Right.
so
Um,
it's just education.
Absolutely. Awareness, right? Because,
Yes.
and I've said this before and I'll keep saying it until we are truly in acceptance, but I think in the Hmong world, we're still working on awareness. I think awareness is key. It's important. We have to go through it. Sometimes it's hard going through awareness because you're like, autism are we truly grasping it?
Yeah.
Are we understanding it? Like, you don't even have to like it. You don't have to, um, anything. Can you just understand it, right? Are you
Mhm.
aware of it? And then I hope that in my lifetime, right, um, while I'm still able to advocate and work, that we can reach acceptance. But I know that it takes a while because mainstream media, mainstream world, mainstream autism world, it took them a long time, and I think
Yeah.
we're just finally at acceptance. So, yeah, thank you for sharing that. And, you're right. And I'm going to say this, I'm home because I think this is really important. I think that yeah, yung jiet tan thought your name more autism na. Mom, Mika, anybody. Sometimes even for Guna, I'm like, because I work with Guya clients, I've seen all the different mannerisms and everything.
Mhm.
Sometimes I'm like, Kupamwana, because I'm
Yeah.
like, why am I so, and this is a term that I know it's kind of outdated, but I still feel like it's the best way to describe it is like sometimes I can be very rigid, I'm like, no,
Mhm.
it has to be done this way. And so sometimes
Yeah.
I'm like, is that the Hmong brain or is that the
The
autism, like, because
yeah.
I can't let it go because I'm like, no, it has to occur just like this. Otherwise, like I lose everything because I'm like, I know I can't do that way, so it's like, is that the OCD? Is that autism? That's just me
Mhm.
being Hmong, me being a
Yeah.
woman. I don't know, right?
Well
And
well,
so, yeah.
and I just wanna say too, like, you can like, so I personally, I developed OCD and, neuroticism
Mhm.
because I had untreated ADHD.
Mhm.
So, that's why I think it's also important to know these things because if I,
Yeah.
had gotten into the habit of doing things in a healthy manner, I wouldn't have developed more, uh, you know, I don't wanna say, like, mental illness, but, like, I wouldn't have more divergency.
Yeah. It just, it would, um, go on a limb to say the severity of it wouldn't have worsened, right? Like, if you had
Yes,
gotten,
yeah.
like, the proper treatment and strategies in play, then you could have, like, been able to, perhaps learn different coping skills to help
Yes.
you
Yeah.
to mitigate that as opposed to yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that it got to the point where you had the thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, like you said, that made you question um uh living or not. And I'm glad that you pursued getting help, and I'm so glad that you have your husband to kind of help you see it from a different perspective, that had he not,
Yeah.
it's all about having those tools, so he himself was a tool in your toolbox. So
Yes.
thankful
Yeah.
for that. And thank you so much for sharing all of this. And I know it's such a, I feel like I could talk with you forever. I feel like we need to have you back and talk about other aspects of this because I think that transparency, that openness, and willingness to share, because, really, like, I bet you, I can think in my head right now, there are at least a handful of people, more people out there that are like just have been waiting for someone to speak on this, to say this, because we all experience this, right? And when
Oh,
I
yeah,
was saying about how,
absolutely.
and I don't say or share about my my undiagnosed OCD, all of that, lightly. Like, I really truly feel like that is a thing that kind of like impacts my daily life, and I think
Yeah.
just to say that for Tantape, Hmong people, any kind of individual, I think being more something. We all have kind of a little something that makes
Yeah.
us,
Yeah.
feel a little like, I just, I need to get a handle on this because maybe it's taking over this aspect of my life. Like I said, like when it comes to cleaning, I'm really OCD about it, but I have
Yeah.
to, like remember, okay, what am I doing? How is this impacting my life? And then I think for the it's where for you, like, you recognize like it was impacting your life in such a way that it was leading you to have these intrusive thoughts, and so that's when
Yeah.
you sought
Yeah.
support, right? And so I think that, like, yeah, we kind of growing up, we were taught to think, or to um you know to feel like there's only one way to be. And if you're not
Yes,
in
yeah.
alignment with that, then you are wrong. There's something wrong with you. But
Yeah.
to be able to go, all these things are me and I'm okay, right? I just
Yeah,
need some support. I
definitely.
just need someone to hear me out.
Mhm.
I just need someone to know that I need help. And gosh, that was such a good point too, Mania, because I think as Hmong people, as Hmong women, we don't know how to ask for help. Even if we're like,
No, like
like on the ground, like, "Tuyo," "Opa chita," we don't know how to ask for help because of
yeah,
all the
like
things that our parents taught us. They didn't teach us how to ask for help, and
no,
so
yeah, say it was they taught independence and
yes.
yeah.
The value of faith, y'all, the value of
Yeah.
knowing it all without having the tools and all of that, and so I'm
Yeah.
just so proud to hear your story and to share your story with big y'all listeners, idea, asking for help and being open to it and surrounding yourself with individuals who love you enough to support you regardless of even if, I think pursuing that diagnosis, right?
Yeah.
Even if you're in your 20s, in your 30s, right? Like your mental health, wellness, and self care, all that's important. But sometimes we need someone to kind of push us there. So
Yeah.
I'm just really excited to hear your story. Is there anything else that you would like to share with our listeners about, the pursuit of the autism diagnosis as an adult, or even your experience?
Just I would say like with my experience, I really hope that like if anybody out there does have any inkling or any feeling of it, like just I pursue it because I don't think anybody should get to the point that I got to before I ended up pursuing it where like I wish I would have, you know, listened to my husband earlier and
Hmm.
gotten the help earlier before burning out completely and then just like feeling like I had a complete loss and having to start from there.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate you. And I look forward to more chats in the future.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much. I'm so glad there's someone out there, putting the word out there for our Hmong community.
Absolutely. It has been my pleasure too. And it's so validating, encouraging for me to hear that. Thank you. I appreciate you.
Okay, thank you so much.